Welcome to By-The-Bywater, a podcast on the Megaphonic Network. I'm Ned Raggett.
I'm Oriana Schwint.
I'm Jared Pekacek.
And we're here to talk about all things J.R.R. Tolkien, his work, his inspirations and impact, creative interpretations in other media, languages, lore, rip-offs, parodies, anything we think is interesting. Thanks for joining us. Hello and welcome to the 77th episode of By-The-Bywater. It is great to be back with you all, and Oriana, you just had a film festival world premiere thing. How'd that all go?
Yeah, we did. We sold out both screenings. They gave us 2 screenings and we sold out both of them. We did lose the Tourmaline prize because ours wasn't a feel-good movie about Maine and small towns in Maine, but that's okay. We're not bitter about it at all. But the first of several film festivals, we can't talk about some of the others that we've gotten into yet, but there will be more. Already the scam distributors have started getting into contact with us. So, hey, we will see.
Are scam distributors a plague? I'm not surprised, but are they a plague?
Absolutely a plague. It's also just kind of hard to tell the difference between people who are just doing their best and people who are actually scammers. So that's a fun little thing to navigate.
Yeah. The Fire Festival equivalent, but sometimes people are good and sometimes they are not. So.
Yeah. Sometimes your movie goes up on Tubi and you actually get some of the money, and sometimes you don't. So
such a sad thing. So, and Jared, you're still in the thick of awards season, or things are upcoming?
Yeah. So this is going to come out, I think, like 2 weeks before the Hugo Awards. So I'm a Schrodinger's award winner for this at the moment.
Award winner in our hearts.
Yeah. Well, I am an award winner, just not necessarily for the Hugos yet. I've started getting a ton of scam marketing people too, where it's like, oh, your work is so unique. We loved Robot Voice, The West Passage. like, oh, let me make you a book trailer. I'm like, we did that.
God.
Like, my partner and I made animations for this. Like, leave me alone.
Amazing.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Well, I have not been plagued by scammers on these lines, just the usual spam and other things that I mostly ignore because it ends up in the spam folder. I will say that in keeping with I mentioned last time, I've had a couple more podcast appearances of late, including one that was, if you ever want to know about how the heck I got into being the music guy in the first place for Randy Rendell's podcast, Hyphenate, we'll throw in a link to that in the show notes. It was a very good chat. And by the time this episode is out, something I'm looking forward to. It's a charity album that I've been coordinating for a friend who unfortunately has glioblastoma. There you go. We'll leave it at that. The full details for the album called One More Tune will be up soon. And as Louis stated, is tomorrow, the day after this recording. So again, by the time this episode goes live, those will be available. We'll link those in the show notes as well. So a mix of things, keeping busy, staving off the wolf at the door in all terms. And here we are with that. But there is some news, and there is some actual news, some actual big news of a sort this time.
Very surprising.
So Jared, take it away.
Yeah, it's not just Rings of Power news or whatever.
Right.
No question about what leads our news section this time. We have a new book by Tolkien en route later in the year, although more accurately it might be called a combination of drafts and analysis, called The Bovadium Fragments. It looks at a story that was briefly mentioned in Humphrey Carpenter's biography, but otherwise has remained essentially unknown all this time. The description of the work indicates it's an environmental parable or satire of some sort, with Bovadium standing in as a name for Oxford, and detailing Tolkien's own well-known dislike of automobiles and environmental destruction as a result. Per the announcement from HarperCollins, the text was edited by Christopher Tolkien sometime before his passing in early 2020, while an accompanying essay, The Origins of Bovadium, is written by Richard Ovenden. Ovenden? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's embarrassing. The current head of the Bodleian Library in Oxford, where nearly all of Tolkien's papers are archived, aside from the material held by Marquette University. The official release date is November 18th, and if there's more specifics to share before that day arrives, we'll pass that along. We'll also note the news that John Hendricks' acclaimed graphic novel, The Mythmakers, looking at the story of Tolkien's friendship with C.S. Lewis, has now been slated for animated adaptation by the indie studio Burns & Co. More on that as we hear it.
Yeah, the Burns & Co. are one of those, I guess you can call it faith-based indie studios, from what I can tell.
Ooh, oh.
God, given the story, folks, come on.
Yeah.
It's about Tolkien leading Lewis towards the light, if you will. Things like that. Why wouldn't they do that?
Right,
this one seems a little less, I don't want to say questionable than most. They seem semi-pro.
It's not freaking Pure Flix or whatever.
From what I can tell, no, but there's probably a lot of shared DNA. So it's just one of those things. I was just looking at this going like, figures. So we'll see. I mean, as long as it's not an adaptation that shows them, walking the street in 1920s Oxford wearing MAGA hats or something, I think we're fine.
Wow. I wonder if they're going to sort of soft pedal the Catholicism at all.
Right.
Surely. These are good questions. We'll yet to see what the answers are. So, but that will come out. But yeah, the Bovadium fragments. News to me. When that news came around, I'm like, what is this?
Right?
Yeah, right? I don't even remember. It's been years since I've read the biography, so I don't remember this at all.
Yeah, same here. It just didn't stick in my brain a bit. I mean, I remember bits like how the new Shadow was mentioned in there and things like this as those emerged. But as soon as it came out, I was like, was that in there? Was that really in there? And it was. I was like, dang. But yeah, no, totally unknown. I mean, it seems like it might be something not quite like Mr. Bliss, I guess. It probably won't be, but probably maybe as much of state of completion as Mr. Bliss. Who knows? We'll see. So we were joking a bit about how since Christopher Tolkien is the editor and he has been gone now for 5 years, it's sort of like, what else has he done? What else is waiting to emerge?
Which this time release capsule. I'm not looking forward to this one, actually, to be honest. Just because I feel like his satire is a little it kind of stops at like, this thing I dislike is bad.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, oh, I love trees, I hate cars. Yeah. And that's going to be, I don't know.
Welcome to the war on cars, Tolkien.
I know.
Yeah,
I hate cars too. I just feel like it's not going to be any more than like, they're loud. Kids these days with their hatchbacks. I don't know what the kids had.
I have no idea. I can't imagine going off
jalopies. They're
trying to imagine going off against hot rodders, but I'm like, England, Oxford, late 1950s. We're not talking drag races down the main street, as far as I know. So.
Wouldn't be surprised, though.
We will find out. But it is interesting that we're getting this essay from Ovenden, because I'm sort of like, oh, yeah, why wouldn't a guy who leads the Bodley and have something to say about maybe even just, state of the papers or the stuff like that? It's sort of like, I'm not familiar with him as a scholar, but I presume he didn't get that job just, for the heck of it. So,
Nepo baby.
You never know. He's got a Wikipedia entry. Maybe we should read it more closely.
Never trust someone with a Wikipedia entry.
Hey, I had one for years. Wait a minute.
Exactly.
Wait, you do? You have a okay.
Oh yeah. Well,
I didn't know that, Ned. Everyone has to look up Ned on Wikipedia.
I don't, and I'm surprised at this point.
Yeah, me too. So, and my Wikipedia page, it ended a long time ago. Some friends
What do you mean
started
it ended? What?
Well, it ran for a while, and it was there, and it was kind of useful. So, like, I'm an actual music critic.
I'm a real guy.
And apparently what happened, the interview was like, is this guy actually really that well known? And I'm like, this is actually a fair assessment, honestly.
Not notable.
I don't care. It was fun. It was fun for a while. It was a fun little calling card, and it was accurate. It was accurate for what it's worth. Basically said he's a music critic. He's written about this, and I'm like, great, thanks. So this is past selves. Let us move on. Let's move on to something else mythical, like my Wikipedia is now that that never existed, or did it? So Oriana, the choice of topic has come to you. The floor is yours.
Yeah, we talking dragons.
Yes.
I wanted to keep it kind of light, just again, because of everything and also, being a little busy. But yeah, these dragons are the magical creature that I think is probably most associated with the fantasy genre today. There is this resurgence of fairy. In my opinion, it's like this really horrible bastardized version that I have like a lot of thoughts about. That
100%.
Right? I'm just saying. Although, I don't know, I have not read any of the Fourth Wing books, so I cannot comment on what their dragons are like, if they are also kind of a weird bastardization. What's kind of funny to me is that despite Tolkien being the father of modern fantasy and being very personally into dragons, there aren't any dragons in the Lord of the Rings. And yes, there's an asterisk for you nerds out there. Don't worry. Oh, I'll get to the little asterisk. I know about Scatha. But There are plenty of other dragons in Tolkien's work because, as I mentioned, he was extremely personally into dragons, which is very relatable. We have, of course, Smaug. We have Glaurung making his mark in the Silmarillion. We have Ancalagon the Black in the Silmarillion as well, although it's a bit more brief there. We have Farmer... Wait, is it Giles or Giles? I can't remember.
Farmer Giles of Ham, I
okay.
think it is. I never remember.
Somebody is screaming at their headphones right now listening.
We did an episode about this.
We did, yes. Yeah. Go back and listen to that one, see what we decided on. We'll just ride with that one.
We have Farmer Giles of Ham with Chrysophylax Dives, our wheeler dealer dragon, which again we talked about in episode 10, which was like 5 years ago, by the way. Insert gif of the Holy Grail Indiana Jones thing. Even Roverandom has a great white dragon that breathes fire and has wings. The first story that Tolkien wrote, at least according to him in letter 163, was at age 7 or 6 in a different letter, and it was about a quote, green great dragon, unquote. And that's notable because his mother corrected him and said, it's great green dragon. And that sort of inspired his love of language, trying to figure out why you say great green dragon instead of green great dragon. And in letter 122, we have Tolkien writing to one Naomi Mitchison, who is a fan of Farmer Giles of Ham. He says, quote, I find dragons a fascinating product of imagination, but I don't think the Beowulf one is frightfully good. But the whole problem of the intrusion of the dragon into Northern imagination and its transformation there is one I do not know enough about. Fafnir in the late Norse versions of the Sigurd story is better, and Smaug in his conversation obviously is in debt there. End quote. Fafnir, for those not in the know, is a quote-unquote dwarf in the Volsung saga and earlier and later Germanic myths who shapeshifts into a dragon. And before, we go on, I do want to acknowledge that in this conversation in particular, I am talking specifically about dragons in the European tradition, as Tolkien was. Dragons in Southeast and East Asian literature is like super, super cool, but not something Tolkien really seemed to have been really exposed to. And also the asterisk I mentioned earlier. Again, I know Scatha is mentioned in the appendices. That does not count. So, guys, how do you feel about dragons in fantasy literature and dragons in Tolkien in particular?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, just as I was thinking about, we're going to topic about how I first learned about dragons. I'm pretty positive that the first sense of it, and I remember when I heard this title, I was like, but what does that mean? Was the story The Reluctant Dragon. And, this would have been about 5 or something like that. Now, to be fair, I have a feeling I must have seen some sort of representation of dragons or something before that in something. I don't know what, cartoons or something like that. I don't know. I was certainly aware of dinosaurs by that age. Believe me, a classic little kid, 4 or 5 year old thing. It's like, oh wow, and all that. But dragons specifically, I think it would have been that story. And where it goes from there, it's sort of intertwined. For me, dragons as a fantastic element have always been strongly identified with Tolkien by virtue of the fact of me seeing the Rankin Bass Hobbit when I was 6, and therefore Smaug. It's sort of like, a dragon right there. But something in terms of just them in and of themselves, and again, setting aside, as you said, the East Asian representations of them, the sense I would get, it was sort of like, for me, especially we're talking about the late 70s now, early 80s, getting sort of more aware, it was very much a combination of things, I guess was the idea. Part of it was like Dungeons and Dragons, it's in the name. And learning about from the various rule books that there could be different kinds of dragons in this particular, fantasy game world, but nonetheless, I could name things like the fantasy movie Dragon Slayer with a notable stop motion animation dragon, which is one of the very first things that ILM, the noted effects house, did after getting their feet wet and building up with Star Wars. It was one of their first outside Lucasfilm commissions. And while the film was very uneven, it's actually, pretty good representation there. And so, you get the sense of, that case was just a fiery, unthinking animal, for lack of a better term, just going around burning things up and blowing things up or whatever and all that. So, as one does. And then another turn for me would have been when I started reading the Anne McCaffrey books, the Dragon Riders of Pern books, which, are good classic adolescent reading, at least of the time. I don't know about now. But certainly fits. Yeah, I was about to say, I think they were of their moment. But in that moment, the idea that even more so than, Smaug getting for Tolkien, and more about in Tolkien in a second, shows us one particular kind of dragon and all that. The idea that dragons could be, communicating even with a kind of telepathy, have a certain range of emotions, but also not be human was a very interesting element. It's one of those things that are like, oh, okay, the sense of what this sort of binding thing would mean. Science fiction, fantasy, whatever you want to call it. Again, it's one of those things that sort of emerges as it does, however much McCaffrey retrofit everything, you could say. And but I could go on more about like other encounters of like dragons as fantastic things and other things in literature and movies and stuff like that over time, because that list would go on forever. But that gives a sense of sort of my immediate sense of there's these things out there. How they function in Tolkien, since I would be discovering Glaurung and I would be discovering Caliban the Black around this time too and all that. It's interesting because on the one hand, you have a very clear example of a dragon who is created by malice for malice, and that's Glaurung. It's sort of like, here's my slow-moving nuclear bomb that can destroy everything, and will, essentially.
And it's so petty.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's a mean girl nuclear bomb.
It truly is. And just going to do things. Then you have essentially the unknown ones, Caliban, Scatha, okay, and all that. But then we get back to Smaug, and of course Smaug is just so wonderfully what a great character. What a great character. Glaurung just exists to be his petty, yes, but is truly, strictly, utterly an asshole. No less so than Smaug, but Smaug is sure as hell more comfortable with himself than being an asshole.
It's got a personality.
True
just
personality.
Oozing out of every scale.
And then Chrysophylax stepping outside of that, it shows again Tolkien sort of like, okay, what if we made him more sort of like, it could be destructive, but what if he's just sort of like a type guy and all that? The closest thing to a Warner Brothers cartoon version of a dragon in Tolkien, kind of, very much more parallel than anything else. So I think it's one of those things that, trying to systematize dragons in Tolkien is a bad idea. I don't think he ever allowed himself to do it beyond the idea that Morgoth made him great, and all that. That sort of like it establishes a baseline, but in the same way you can say, well, Morgoth made orcs, or like, well, what exactly does that mean and all that. We don't ever see a good dragon in Middle Earth, as far as I can tell. It just doesn't seem to exist. So it's sort of like you're a force of evil, but maybe you just want to be left alone and you're just sort of like burn things out because you're just sort of annoying people. I don't know what your deal is. So it makes dragons in Tolkien kind of plastic. It's almost sort of like what fits the vibe, what works at any particular point. And Tolkien seems to be reserving the right to change his mind whenever the hell he wants to. So I'll stop there for now.
I mean, Smaug was my first fantasy dragon, so I'm very fond of him. I think I read The Hobbit and then the Pern books.
Mm-hmm.
I think he did systematize them in a way. Like, he didn't create an elaborate taxonomy or whatever for them, but he was doing, I think, and I'm kind of parroting a paper that I read. Now I can't remember the author or anything. If I find it, I'll let you know. But it was talking about how, looking at all of the, medieval dragon lore and trying to make it coherent within the world of Middle-earth. They're almost mythical by the time of Lord of the Rings. None of them are still around as far as we know.
Mm-hmm.
But, from these different personalities of dragon is where you might see the origin of later dragon stories, I think was the argument it was making. So, which I thought was interesting. I haven't thought of it in those terms before. I think the only sort of dragon mytheme that doesn't show up is the St. George type thing, where it's the maiden being taken or whatever. It gets close with Glaurung and Niniel, but otherwise it's there's the dragons that hoard, there's the dragons that are almost biblical in their power, like Encalagon. I don't think I've summarized the paper very well, but I was very tired when I read it, so please. Yeah, so to me, when I was younger and newer to fantasy anyway, the Smaug is what dragons were.
Yeah.
Like, that's how I thought they all had to be. And it's so funny to me that he apparently disliked the Beowulf dragon, because the Beowulf dragon slaps. It's so good.
I want to know, I guess the kind of dragon that Tolkien thought was good is the ones that he wrote, is my guess. Like, but how is that all that, how are they all that different from the Beowulf dragon?
Well, I mean, notably, the Beowulf dragon doesn't speak.
Yeah.
True.
There's a lot of extreme similarities between the Beowulf dragon and the storyline in The Hobbit, where like it is awakened when a cup is stolen. But I think what he wanted was a dragon that talked, and those don't really exist prior to him.
Yeah, not
in the same way. I think like I don't think Fafnir counts because he is not originally a dragon.
Yeah, he is a sentient, humanoid being.
Yeah, and I think there are like mythological dragons that probably talk, but not in the same, like they don't have personality the way that Tolkien writes his dragons. Like Glaurung is a jerk. Smaug is also a jerk, but in a very like upper class rich person kind of way. Like I think taking the time to give your character's personality, or give your dragon's personality, is a very Tolkienian thing.
Right.
Yeah.
I was just looking just now to try and remind myself who wrote The Reluctant Dragon and When, and I see it was Kenneth Grahame, Mr. Wind in the Willows, and which some reason I thought it was Wild, but would have taken a different turn if it wasn't that. Around the same era, but from 1898. So the likelihood of Tolkien reading it, I would say, is probably pretty high.
Yeah.
You're still a kid around the time it came out, so I wouldn't be surprised if we encounter that. I'm not trying to say there's a one-to-one, and maybe there's been more work done studied on that, but I'd be willing to bet he was well aware of the principle of a talking dragon that way. But of course, we know what Tolkien felt like when it comes to later how he looked back on fairy tale versions of anything. so he probably had something there. But anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you too much there, Jared. If you were there anything further to go there for?
No, not really. Not as such. I do think it's interesting that like which dragons get a voice, I guess. In Tolkien, like you don't hear from Scatha, you don't hear from Encalagon. It's nice, the impression of depth and all that.
Question for you all, because I don't have like a good theory, but why do you think there are not any dragons in the actual body, in the actual story of The Lord of the Rings? Was it like he had already kind of done it with Smaug? Like he was like, well, I did this, and like there's just no real place in the story for it, maybe? Or I am just really curious about why there wouldn't be one. I'm glad, to be clear, they
don't need to be.
I don't think there should be one in there, but he could have very easily. Smaug has a brother. I don't know.
He's out for vengeance.
Like even if it's just like some kind of episode with like in the Misty Mountains, or there's one in like there's a Balrog in Moria instead of a dragon. Like that's interesting to me, and we don't really have like again we don't need an explanation, but that's just kind of interesting to think about. Like
I mean I think they. Like we already did Smaug in The Hobbit, we don't need another dragon. It's kind of it would be kind of samey. I also think whether he intended this or not, and he probably didn't necessarily intend it, having Smaug be essentially the last dragon that we ever hear from adds to the feeling of like the world is moving on and wonders, even if they are evil wonders, are falling behind. So there might still be dragons around, but the story is not about them anymore. They're probably dying off. They're kind of already in the past by the time we get to Frodo, which is cool because it's like recent memory. Like there are people alive who remember Smaug, but like
which is why the
he's
dragon
already fading into
fireworks
legend
are so effective.
So I think that works. Even if he didn't intend it, again, I think it works thematically really well.
Yeah.
And your point about, this kind of disappearance, because, we have the Balrog, but it's the Balrog, as far as anyone knows. So, in other words, there's no other one. Similarly, what is Sheila but the last of Ungoliant's unhappy children? This idea that there's something that, again, it all builds out of Tolkien's own mythologies at this point. He is looking back at it all because he's set this thing so far ahead of where his tales had come from that, he can legit look back as an author and saying like, I had those. Things like that. And I don't want in the sense that he's necessarily moving on from them as tropes. Otherwise, I thought that not to do that, he wouldn't have included them at all. Clearly he did. So, no, and there's the pleasure in that because, I mean, they're just, they're great monsters, to put it that way. I think something of the little bleed over, and I thought this is where you might have been going with this, Oriana, but it wasn't, was when you thought the asterisk, I thought you meant, oh, right, the Nazgul's flying steeds.
Right.
Who are like, not described as dragons, but definitely described as weirdly reptilian. And, you see interpretations of them as like pterodactyls or things like that in like Rankin Bass. We have them essentially as mini dragons in the Jackson adaptations.
Yeah.
That's essentially what they are. They don't breathe fire or anything like that, but look at them and go like, it looks dragony. But again, Tolkien doesn't specify that. He does not call them dragons.
Yeah, they are fell beasts.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, isn't there in the letters, he's like, it's kind of like a pteranodon, but whatever. Like he said,
Yeah.
it's probably something like that. Like he was very clear they weren't dragons, but aside from that, he's like, eh.
Yeah.
I wonder then
whatever.
if that means that because, you think fantasy, you think dragons, I wonder if that did motivate Jackson and company to have the fell beasts essentially be cold drakes, as one might call them. Where
I love that term.
I know, it's
a
so
great term. Yeah, what
evocative.
does it imply? Do they breathe ice? Do they only live in cold things?
What is the point of being a dragon if you don't have something that comes out of your mouth? Although I feel like that is kind of a very ancient type of dragon.
Yeah, the really old, mythological dragons, like Illuyanka from Hittite mythology. They're sea creatures. They don't breathe fire because really old dragons are associated with the sea. They're like chaos serpents.
You have the Hydra.
Sorry, you activated my.
Yes, I love it. Like sleeper agent Jared talking about Hittite mythology, but no, the dragon that guards the golden apple.
Yeah,
right.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, in Greek mythology.
I don't think it breathes.
No, initially
fire.
a lot of them are either sea creatures or they're very venomous.
Yeah,
but they're not fiery.
Yeah, I think I started doing some research into when did the fire breathing part come along, and then I just got distracted by other things I had to do. So sorry, everyone.
I mean, I'd be willing to bet it's a biblical misunderstanding because I think so anybody who speaks Hebrew will definitely correct me on this, but I feel like there's a word that's used for snakes and it's almost the same as the word for seraph, like seraphim, and it means burning, and the idea is that maybe they're called that because their venom burns.
Okay.
So you might refer to a fiery serpent, and an ancient person would mean, oh, it just burns when they bite you.
Yeah.
A modern person would be like, oh, a fiery serpent. Oh, okay,
fire.
so it breathes fire. I don't know if any of that's how we got here, but
we're doing vibe entomology now.
I did research, but not into this. Not into biblical dragon.
Look, it's the summer. Lots of other things are happening. But that is thinking about all these. We have a number of different kinds of Tolkienian dragons. By the way, this episode is when I realized that Glaurung doesn't have wings.
Really?
Yeah.
This is when you realize?
I
am a little curious about that. Yeah.
Look, sorry.
I have difficulties with imagining things that I'm reading, okay? Way to kick me when I'm down. Anyway.
I'm sorry.
Anyway.
Oh, I felt bad the instant I said that, if it makes you feel better.
It's actually extremely funny, and I am a big dum-dum, so I don't think you should feel bad. That's crazy. Because I have read through, as in two pieces, 2 copies of the Silmarillion. So this is really just wow. He does conform a lot to these classical sort of attributes. We've got our supernatural stairs. We've got our large serpentine bodies with or without wings. We've got fire breathing and not. We've got guarding of treasure. Okay, I will ask you guys this question first. And I will answer because I don't want to belabor this. Who's your guy? Do dragons have gender? This is something I am just thinking of now. Do dragons Do they have gender? I know it uses he, but is that just for convenience? Because they don't. They do reproduce, right?
Yeah. Glaurung is the father of dragons and has a brood and all that.
Yeah. But who's the mother of dragons? Different book. I know. So, okay, Tolkien dragons do have gender. Interesting. Okay. I hadn't, thought about that. Anyway, or...
I'll just finish this thought really fast.
Yeah.
Since they are essentially weird fantasy science experiments on the part of Melkor, who's to say they aren't just agender and they reproduce just with triples or whatever.
Yeah, they bud.
They bud. They parthenogenesis.
Yes, that was the word I was trying to think of.
We don't know. They could be just engineered to just lay eggs. We don't know. We don't know.
I could see that, and again, it's one of those things where I don't need to know.
Yeah,
but curiosity.
It's not maybe this is controversial, but it's not actually good. We don't need diversity in dragon gender. They are all evil. Canonically, they are evil things.
Again,
so we don't need a powerful lady dragon to be canonical.
Boss bitch Glaurunga.
Right. We don't actually need that.
No, I definitely don't. It is kind of interesting that they are all male, though.
Yeah.
You would think that there would be an evil, a female dragon somewhere. That's kind of interesting. Yeah, anyway.
Anyway. But to answer your actual question, Glaurung is my favorite, partly because I find him so upsetting. He's, I remember, kid Jared reading The Hobbit, Smaug, yeah, he's evil, he's mean, but, he's fun.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I was like, I'll read the Silmarillion. I bet this will be just as fun as The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings was. You get to the story of Turin. By that point, you're already traumatized.
This is so upsetting.
Especially if you're a child and this is the darkest thing you've ever read. And I got to Glaurung and I was like, oh my... I was not prepared for how mean he is. It's one thing to be like, oh yeah, this guy, this dragon just burned a bunch of dwarves up and took their gold. It's almost like watching CGI spectacle in a Marvel movie where it's it's not real, it's just pixels. But the extreme reality in a way of his pettiness of just I'm just going to mess with you because I am more powerful than you. You have no power against Glaurung. It's almost an accident that Turin even is able to kill him. And he just uses that just to be as mean as possible because he's a mean person and he has no redeeming qualities. And that's so interesting. And it makes for a really, really disturbing part of the book. And I love that. Even as every time I read it, I'm like, oh. Again, the pettiness. He doesn't have to do any of this. Having Turin stand there while everybody else is driven by pleading for help. That he doesn't need to do that. He's just doing it because he wants to show how powerful he is to all the people he's just conquered. He's really rubbing it in their faces. And that's such upsetting writing. It's really, really effective. So that's why he's my favorite. Also, he's just, I don't know, the father of dragons, that's cool, right? He's super powerful. He's his vaingloriousness, he shows up too early when he's still soft and squishy and he has to be
it's oh God, get back in the oven. Get back in the oven.
Yeah. I don't know, he's always doing something interesting.
Making Anfelglith the mess it is.
I feel like Smaug is the slasher movie villain where you're obviously he's going to try and cut you up or run you down in a car or whatever. It makes sense. You're that's just what you do.
Yeah.
Glaurung is the psychological torture demon.
He's the Hannibal Lecter, kind of.
Yeah. He's going to fixate on you specifically and ruin your life because he can. Smaug is not animalistic or anything, but it does feel as though he is just doing things that are in his nature, kind of. Whereas Glaurung, it feels much more conscious and sort of meta, he is telling himself a story about how he's gonna ruin this family's life forever in just the most horrible ways.
Smaug is appetite and desire. He wants things because he likes shiny stuff, which that's relatable. He wants to eat dwarves. He's hungry. Hunger is relatable. Glaurung is just a jerk.
Well, the thing about Smaug that I think about it now is that, counterintuitive argument here, but would have been easier if he was just sort of left alone, because he seems like all he wants to do mostly is sleep. I mean,
if
Tolkien retcons
nothing,
it. Tolkien retcons it in Lord of the Rings, saying like, if we hadn't killed him, he might have, Sauron might have activated him, and who knows what could happen. Fully granted, but in the original sense of the original story, before everything became the superstructure it is, did Smaug do terrible things? Clearly. What's he doing now when he comes into sleeping?
Yeah.
This is the same problem I have with The Matrix, where surely it would be better just to leave the people in the fantasy world they're living in. Because by trying to free them, you're causing the machines to fight back. Anyway, that's a different podcast.
Different podcast, but it's a hell of a comparison. I can live with that. So, obviously, it wouldn't fit the whole point of the story.
I know,
but it's interesting, though, that whereas... How to put it? I mean, whereas, in the Silmarillion, Glaurung's appearance first shocks everybody, and then everyone's sort of wary for good reason about Glaurung until the end of his days when he does finally go. Everyone's trying to figure out one way or another, can we stop him? Can he be killed? Can he be evaded? What do we do?
Yeah. He's an out-of-context problem.
Yeah.
Whereas
in The Hobbit, whatever else, Smaug is this distant looming threat that we're going to go see, and we get closer and closer and closer. And then we finally get that amazing sequence where it's Bilbo alone in the tunnel, and he has to gird himself up and actually says, okay, he'll do that. And, Tolkien invests this with a sense of this was the bravest thing he'd ever done. This is like the thing, it's the turning point when he goes in there, and the way he's introduced the glow of Smaug, there he lay, it's a wonderful bit of, it's a classic, you can have your comparisons to other things, Harry Lime in The Third Man when he finally appears, or other things like that, the idea you build to something, and when you get him, you're like, oh, and of course, it's Tolkien's one of chief illustrations that he made for The Hobbit. He sort of invested it with some real sense of it, although, strictly speaking, it's the second time Bilbo goes down, because it's when they actually have the conversation. And I do love that, we have to keep, there are many different ways to interpret Smaug, but since we have the visual interpretation, and we have Tolkien's other little illustration of dragons here and there throughout, it's kind of good to, keep this one in mind. I like the fact that, that it's, the Tolkien Smaug as depicted seems to be very, long, thin body with the wings all there, and sort of resting, I was saying resting bitch face, but something pretty close to it.
Resting dragon face?
Yeah, resting dragon face, yeah. There's an episode title. It's just sort of sitting there, just sort of frowning towards where he knows Bilbo is, but can't quite see him, just going, what? Why are you bothering me?
Right. He had a good thing going. He came to it in a bad way, but, he had a good thing going, and now can't stop bothering him.
Yeah.
So Oriana is arguing for the forcible seizure of wealth from an oppressed people.
Hey, they weren't oppressed when he arrived. Let's be clear. Okay.
They were driven from Moria. They were not having a good time before they got to Erebor.
This is true.
Look, it all seemed to have worked out just fine. I'm kidding. I do not believe any of the words that just came out of my mouth.
Well, if you think of it that way, yes. First, the Balrog drives them originally out of Moria. They go to Erebor. Then they go up to the Grey Mountains. Then the Cold Drakes get them there. So it's like third time's around.
They cannot catch a break.
Cannot, go to the Iron Hills or go nowhere, it seems, or hang out in the Blue Mountains.
Here's actually a thing I just thought of that is the kind of thinking that I hate to do, but the thought occurred to me, and now I'm so sorry. Everyone has to deal with it. So, we have Balrogs, we have the Valarukkar. They are Maiar. They are sort of low angelic beings, spirits of fire. They do or do not have wings. We won't get into it. But they
just like dragons.
Just like dragons. So that's actually the thing is it's kind of funny that Melkor has this squadron of Balrogs and creates dragons anyway, which does speak to the sort of science experiment. This dude really wanted to create things. And that's kind of interesting, because why would you bother making a dragon, especially one that doesn't have wings, if you already have these other people who are probably as, effective on the battlefield, if not more so. So, yeah. And now everyone has to deal with that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think there's a couple things happening. That's a very interesting observation.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple things happening. It depends on which version of the legendarium you're in at this point. Like, initially, there's like thousands of Balrogs.
Right.
He changes his mind.
Like,
he changes his mind at some point to be like, yeah, there are maybe 7 of them. So at that point, like, but also he had dragons involved even when there were way more Balrogs. So that's not his thought process. I think part of it certainly is that Melkor is just like chaotic. Like, he cannot stick to any. He's an ADHD king. Like there's, I think in some of the letters, Tolkien points out that Sauron would have been a more effective, ultimate evil god.
Yeah.
Because Melkor was just like, couldn't focus.
Sauron would not have made the dragon.
Well, I may be making this up, but I feel like somebody said at some point somewhere that Sauron helped.
Oh,
I don't know if that's, I could be making that up. Somebody who actually can quote chapter and verse will correct me, I'm sure. But I wouldn't be surprised if Sauron was involved in this at some point. But I just think it's that kind of like Melkor, like restless creativity that Melkor exhibits. Mm-hmm. It's like, of course he's going to do this because he can't stick to one thing.
This makes me think of a point as well, in terms of like if Sauron had done it be more, everything would have been more rigorous, is how it oddly enough makes me think of the Sauron-Shelob relationship in Lord of the Rings, where it's sort of like, we're just doing our own things. Yeah, you're good. Right. But it's not like, Shelob is reporting upstairs to Sauron every time something is happening, anything but. And the sense, again, retconning, but still, the idea that, Gandalf in the bit in the appendices, which was also in the unfinished story about how, imagine what Sauron could have done with Smaug. The idea doesn't seem to have been that Sauron would have just done the equivalent of calling up and going like, "Go do this." It was more sort of like, what could be
Have
fun?
you ever thought? Yeah,
just things like this. I mean, the Jackson movie versions tried to make this more intrinsic. That was a bad idea, but there are many bad ideas. Let's not talk about that one. We can acknowledge it because it is the most, that's the biggest of all the, Smaug is the one who's been adapted the most in all the various adaptations. He's kind of unavoidably so. Nothing against Mr. Cumberbatch, but
nobody else has the rights to Glaurung, so they're not going to do that one.
Right? Yeah, maybe we're lucky that way. So, and
give them to me. Give them to me. I'll do it right. I promise. I promise.
There we go.
Please.
Maybe to go back to your question though, Oriana, sort of that you'd raised earlier, sort of like who's my guy of them all? So Smaug probably. So, but in terms of in Middle Earth, just because it just sort of like he's. To again bring up the adaptations, I said, look, I really don't matter. I just want a really good Smaug. It was a pretty good Smaug. Again, better choices could have been done. But in terms of the one who I actually like the most, it's I'm sorry, it's easily Chrysophylax Dives. This probably speaks to my personality. That is
he's on the wall behind you as we speak.
Right over there. Just sort of like, just because obviously the tone of everything is lighter. I'm thinking of Pauline Baynes' art rather than Tolkien's and things like this. Chrysophylax is, devours a dragon or two when he feels like it, and eats a knight and things like this. But you never feel like it's going like, how terrible. It's more sort of like, bluster. It's kind of fun and things like this. So you could argue it's just my personality. But that, I think, is also part of the joy of it. Yeah, Tolkien knows how to adapt dragons to modes, having mentioned earlier about how the reluctant dragon could have been sort of an inspiration and then something to react against. It kind of shows that he can do something that's not too far off from the reluctant dragon. Chrysophylax is sort of like, he'll go on a rampage, but it's sort of like, just the equivalent of walking around in the woods, or things like that. Just people get in the way sometimes. That's the problem, things like that. And then he just sort of tries to get himself out of scrapes. It's sort of like, okay, it's Chrysophylax is a fun creation. And I also like the fact that it is something that Tolkien, having invested so much time in creating first Glaurung, then Smaug, is sort of like, can I do something else? Yes, I can. And so you get this much different kind of dragon. The sense is he's a much smaller scale, he doesn't really you compare him to the size as described both in the stories and in the Pauline's illustrations. And it's sort of like, oh yeah, you can just sort of talk to him. Like, he can sit up on his haunches in the street and be like, well, and things like that. So just do stuff like that. So that sort of appeals to me. But backing into what Jared's point about how Glaurung is just so the darkest sense of humor in the universe, but it's not funny.
Yeah.
That's the difference between him and Smaug.
He's the only one who's laughing.
Yeah. It's sort of like, can I back away now? It's sort of like, he finds everything endlessly amusing. The problem is nobody else does. And nobody else can. With Smaug and Bilbo, it's one of those things that's sort of like, clearly it's not a banter situation in the famous conversation with Bilbo. It's not really how it works, but there is something of a weird dynamic where you can sense sort of an actual conversation going on. Glaurung just is basically telling you what's going to happen to you and then does it. For most of it is pretty much what happens most of the time. It's just sort of like, and his final words to Nienor. That is you. When Tolkien goes hard, he goes hard. I mean, that was something. Reading that, it's sort of like going like, oh God.
Yeah.
So the last thing to do is that is beyond petty. That is cruel to the end of your days.
Yeah. I think that's why that's the story in the legendarium that I have read I read
it's
it.
hard.
I just don't return to it very often because it's so difficult. Like every step of it, you're like, oh no, and of course that's the point. Point. Glaurung plus all of the other stuff, Turret he just can't get out of his own way. Just really, really difficult. And Glaurung only sort of sets everything to max chaos.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's important to the story that Turin would obviously have caused his own downfall, even if Glaurung hadn't been
right.
there.
Yeah.
I think even Morgoth is like, all your, everything you do is going to turn to shit. The 4th of July is going to turn into the 4th of shit.
This whole thing smacks of dragons.
Genuinely, Turin is just, bruh, you gotta think things through for a second, but he can't. And that's
his tragic flaw.
That's his whole thing, yeah.
I think there's something interesting to be said about how I'm trying to put the words here, is that we get the slight hints of how a dragon in reality, but legendary, plays out through the context of The Hobbit. Light, I grant. Yeah. But I think it is interesting how this human society is there. It's a little town and whatever else associated with it. And sort of like, ooh, bad stuff happened. We know this. Among other things, there's the bones of the old town and things like that. So, and, if we ever go up there, it's sort of like, yeah, things are wasted. Dale is gone. That comes down in memory. And everyone's kind of aware of it. But it's interesting how, until Smaug actually shows up, it's more sort of like, whatever, and all that.
They say there's a dragon,
Yeah.
You can see.
I mean, it's kind of like, as a Seattleite, I can relate. Like, there's a big old mountain just down the way, and we know it's going to wake up at some point, but we're still like, whatever. It might not happen today.
Keep an eye on it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Keep an eye on it.
Yeah. And then you just go about your life. Like, to me, as a kid, I didn't even question that. I was like, of course everybody lives next to a dangerous mountain. Like, don't we all in real life live next to a dangerous mountain?
That's actually a good point of comparison. I'll grant you that. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's sort of like, or me living, California, earthquakes. We all know, just it's sort of like, the nature of the beast. But it's an interesting understated portrait of what humanity does, because the odds are so comparatively low as far as anyone can know, as far as anyone can tell. Ergo, it's one of those things that, the sense of it is that he hasn't been seen in, exact years aren't given, but I don't get the sense that, I think there might be a suggestion of 1 or 2 points in the story about how, like, he's come out or has been so often, but hasn't really bothered them. So it's really what it comes down to. It's sort of like, I can do whatever. Nobody seems to care. And it's like no one intentionally is going because they don't want to know. So that'd be the flip of it. It's sort of like, to extend your metaphor there, Jared, it's sort of like, let's not plant sensors on the mountain in case things blow up. We'll just pretend it just doesn't happen.
I mean, if by climbing Mount Rainier you could risk an eruption, then you wouldn't do it. And it's like, they're avoiding the mountain because they don't want to wake him up. Like,
right. Yeah. We're just doing our thing. We got a good import-export business with the wine here. We're all fine.
I bet there's stories in Lake Town of like some idiot teen who like
all the dumbass teens go and try and figure like how close they can get.
There's like graffiti on the front gate that's like
God.
Smaug is a dick.
And they were never seen again. Ooh.
Oh my God. Yeah, the urban legends that must have popped up around. Also, like just around what a dragon does in general, I'm sure.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But
because like the dwarves remember, the older dwarves remember. The humans, none of them were alive for this. They have no idea.
Right. And again, adaptation versus the real thing. While it's played up far more in the in the Jackson movies, in the story, the elves don't seem to really care. It's sort of like, it's sort of like, yeah, we were around for that, but he seems to be quiet, and it's sort of like, yeah, and all that, which is kind of interesting, given their history
like
with
when,
like,
the lion escapes from the zoo and mauls someone, and then they, it's out of the news. So remember that day when? Oh, okay.
Well, and if you live 100 miles away from the zoo, you're going to be like, they got the lion. Like,
not my business.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, what are the elves supposed to do about it? Like, it's not.
Yeah, I mean, the elves can argue Thranduil, and everyone can argue. It's sort of like, hey, he targeted you. You're the one with all the stuff over there. And what do dragons want? We're just over here in our little hill in our woods. He doesn't care.
Our jewelry collection is much more tasteful.
Yes.
I don't know.
We design fashions for Lee Pace to lounge around in. Yes, exactly.
I do get a little. This is ranging far off the topic of dragons, but I do get a little annoyed when people are like, "Ugh, Tolkien's elves, they're so like snobbish
it's
and like
weird.
they just want to hide." And it's like I always want to be like, they can't do anything.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, they are not capable of doing what you, the reader, want them to do.
Right.
And they also have learned a lot of painful lessons about intervening over the years. So maybe they could have tried to do something about the dragon. I think the movies kind of write them into a corner by being like, they were there, they should have done something. And yeah, if they were there, they should have. But in the book, they weren't. They're like halfway across the continent or something. They were not involved. What were they supposed to do after the fact? Wake him up again? Like, what do you want from the elves here? Like,
I know one of the many bizarre choices, but yeah, I will say there's something. It's interesting because you really have to go back and unpack the original story. And again, The Hobbit is not Lord of the Rings. If Tolkien had done his rewriting, then maybe it would have been different. But forget that.
And terrible.
We have to, terrible idea.
Yeah.
And we have the story as it stands. And it is interesting, this sense of sort of like how he describes how when the word's like, oh wait, Smaug's dead. Everyone's sort of like, whoa, the sense of like, the word spreads quick, and then almost immediately everyone goes like,
they were holding.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's sort of like, hey, he's dead. Who gets the money? It's sort of like it's like hearing like the crabby old relative has died, and you're wondering if you're in the will. Only in this case, you actually have to go and to do that, and just sort of like the only way to do it is to fight it out. It's this sort of like again, it's like this background hum that is suddenly cut off, is type thing. It's sort of everything there. It's sort of like it's not that there won't be a recurrent version of it, because there can't be, because he's gone. So it's a really interesting dynamic how that plays out, and how everyone sort of suddenly starts thinking bigger as soon as Smaug is gone. Nature abhors a vacuum is kind of what it is in its own strange way. That's what's going on there. So interesting stuff. Keeping a vague eye on the time, we should probably wrap up. I have nothing more to add beyond those thoughts I just added. Jared, do you have any final thoughts yourself?
What do dragons represent in Tolkien?
Yeah, fair question.
Because they're not, I mean, Smaug is like a capitalist. He's secure on his mountain of treasure. He gets furious if you take a single cup. But they're not all like that. Like Glaurung doesn't have the same relationship to treasure, and Calagon certainly doesn't even get the chance to amass anything. Like, what are they?
Yeah,
What kind of evil are they? They're not all the same kind of evil.
And Oriana, take us home.
Jared just did a really good job. That's unfortunate.
Oh, you never said who was your favorite, did you say?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Who is your guy?
It is Glaurung because he is such a petty bitch who lives for drama.
True.
So no, he genuinely, like, the idea of, like, being under a dragon's spell is absolutely terrifying, because then you cease to trust yourself, and losing that kind of control, that's, like, very, very scary to me. So Glaurung wins it for me, but Smaug is kind of indelible. Also, Melko, in one of the early like versions,
I hate that.
I know.
I gotta speak my truth. I hate it.
Look, all the
Melkor
the early names are very suspect.
Teleport anyone? Anyway.
Yeah, Tinnelwint. So, we've come a long way. But very Melko creates like iron dragons, and I'm so glad that we didn't get those, because I don't want to. I just think it. Real dragons, flesh and blood, pretty cool.
Besides which, how do you know what to model the iron dragons on if you don't have an actual dragon?
Right.
It's like, I came up with this idea of a thing. And it's like, well, what the?
What if there was a metal snake?
Yeah, let's not go there. Okay, the choice for episode topic has come around to Jared. Jared, what are we talking about next time?
Well, from one group of legendary creatures to another, we are moving from dragons to inklings.
Oh.
What are they? What do they represent? Were any of them evil capitalists? No, I really think we talk about the inklings a lot, and they're a very interesting group of people, certainly flawed in their own ways. But they were, huge influence on Tolkien, and, it goes both ways. And all. They're just a very interesting group of people. I feel like, everybody's homework, audience as well, is probably going to be reading the Humphrey Carpenter book about the inklings.
Right.
But this episode isn't about that book. I just think it might be a good grounding. Right. Even if the world may have moved on since it was written. But yeah, inklings. Special episode from The Eagle and Child. Should we travel to
Yes, exactly. So, didn't Larry Ellison take over that place? I seem to remember we did a news bit about that. So, strange times. I have been in it, though. I can say I have been in it. I was there in 92 for the Tolkien Sings. It was nice at the time. So, that was pretty cool. So, all right. So we'll be talking about the inklings next time. Something to look ahead on, and we'll have more news and stuff and things about what people are doing then too, because things keep happening for us. We can't complain. So we hope good things are happening for you all too. So thank you all again very much for listening. It is always greatly appreciated that you take the time to do so. You can find us megaphonic.fm/By-The-Bywater is our main page, and we are also on Blue Sky as well at By-The-Bywater, as are all of us individually and in various other social media sites. You can contact us at bythebywater@gmail.com. And as always, do please consider joining the Megaphonic Patreon. That lets you into the Discord, where you can see us exchange memes, talk about other things, and go wildly off field in all the other areas and things we like to talk about, which is fun too, we have to say. So it's a really good time.
Watch Ned lose his mind every time one of us makes a silly pun.
The burden I bear, folks. The burden I bear. So, but beyond that, we hope you all keep well, and we look forward to talking to you next time. So until then.